You see, there's a trap that most cottage gardens fall into, and that is not having enough interest year round. Part of the reason we fall into this trap is because most of us are most excited to go into the garden centers to shop for plants in spring and summer. And I get that. But the excitement often wears off by the time the summer heat hits in July. And because garden centers bring an inventory just in time to look best for each new season, they won't have fall blooming plants, for example, until mid-summer. And so if you go mostly in spring, you see the problem. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to my garden. My name is Vanessa, and I turn our yard into our own little happy place at home. And I want to give you whatever tools I have to help you do the same. Today, I'm going to share with you 16 plants, 4 for each season, that I would plant in a sunny flower bed here in my garden. I didn't want to make just any list of plants, but one that made sure to guide you into year-round color. You see, there's a trap that most cottage gardens fall into, and that is not having enough interest year-round. Part of the reason we fall into this trap is because most of us are most excited to go into the garden centers to shop for plants in spring and summer, and I get that. But the excitement often wears off by the time the summer heat hits in July. And because garden centers bring an inventory just in time to look best for each new season, so that they sell things easily, they won't have fall blooming plants, for example, until mid-summer. And so if you go mostly in spring, you see the problem. You'll always miss out on autumn and winter options. What we want is a garden filled with year-round color or evergreens. And so we have to plan for it in the garden design process. A little planning really does go a long way. And so let's get going with our 16 plants, 4 for each season. Of the 4 plants for the season, I made sure that 2 were perennials, 1 was a shrub, and 1 was an annual bulb. And that's because shrubs are the backbone of the garden. They stand tall and give bulk. Perennials are reliable and come back year after year. And annuals, though requiring a little bit of effort to begin each year, are workhorses. They tend to bloom for such a long period of time. It's worth it to plant them. Plant number 1 in spring are peonies. Peonies start this list because they're probably the most popular spring perennial. Peonies are interesting because they're so beloved despite the fact that they have 3 huge flaws. Most varieties have such large and heavy heads that a quick rain shower will flatten the whole plant. They definitely need staking. 2, their blooms only last just a few weeks. There are a ton more perennials that bloom for much longer. And 3, large ants love them. They don't hurt the plant, but some people find them annoying. And so that's what I find to be incredible about the peony, because despite those faults, they're amongst the favorite flowers of the spring gardener. Do you know how good anything has to be for people to tolerate that many faults? You have to be so good. And they are. The heads are indeed huge. And while that doesn't help them stand tall in the garden, they're absolutely mesmerizing in bouquets. I love using peonies in bridal work. 2, they smell amazing. And 3, the blooms can be preserved in the fridge for months for floral work later in the summer. Did you know this? And 4, the plant can live for decades in the ground. Some say for as long as 100 years old. That's longer than most trees. Number 2 on our list is Salvia officinalis. Salvia could have gone on the summer list, but I put it here because I don't know of any earlier blooming perennial than the perennial salvia. Better yet, I don't know of any more consistently blooming perennial than the perennial salvia. It seems to always be in bloom somehow. This past winter, my kids and I found salvia blooming in February. There weren't a ton of blooms, but enough to be noticeable. And throughout the growing season, it consistently flushes a whole new set of blooms quickly after the previous one is done. So you have color all the time with this plant. With purple, pink, or white spikes of bloom, salvia is among the plants that will always be present in my cottage garden. Number 3 are roses. I hope that when you think of a cottage garden, roses come to mind. To see a rose in full flush while surrounded by peonies, catmint, and other cottage plants at the start of spring is nothing short of breathtaking. Roses are shrubs, and some varieties can sometimes be treated as vines. These are called climbing roses. They don't actually climb, they're just treated as such. Roses are also said to be complicated, and honestly, there is a learning curve to them because some roses hate humidity, and so they can struggle with a fungus called black spot, specifically here where I live. But I promise you, there's a rose for you. Once you learn how to grow them, you'll never want to go back. I do have 2 videos on roses, one specifically about the easiest, as in most disease-resistant rose to grow, especially if you live in a humid region. I recommend you watch that. I'll link it at the end of this video for you. For our annual, we have snapdragons. Snapdragons are the most underrated cut flower. They come in many colors and normally stand at most 2 feet tall. You have to start them from seed in late winter and plant them out in really early spring. But if you want to do that, you can find them very easily in garden centers in early spring, I find. So either way, find them and plant them. They will reward you with color throughout the growing season, but especially in the springtime. And the fact that they make such excellent cut flowers makes them worth growing, in my opinion. All right, let's move on to summer. I could have gone on and on about spring blooming plants and want to go on and on about summer blooming plants. Also, what I wanted to do is break summer into early summer and late summer because that's about right. By the time late summer comes around, there's a whole new set of plants that are blooming that are different from the ones that were blooming in early spring. But for our purposes, let's stick to just summer as a whole. First, in early summer, we have catmint. Catmint is one of those plants that you see in every single cottage garden picture that was ever taken ever on Pinterest. And again, for good reason. It does bloom repeatedly throughout the growing season if you cut it back when it's done with whatever flush it's in. But the first flush of it in spring is just so good. It sort of looks like lavender in color and shape, but smells differently, of course. Be mindful that some varieties get bigger than others. So read the plant information tag at the garden center. I mean, do that for all these plants because you have to make sure that whatever variety you get will fit in your garden plot. Next on my summer list is Phlox paniculata. This perennial, in my opinion, is worth its salt, and it's always going to be in the garden. It has blooms that remind me of like the blooms of the hydrangea paniculata, the mouthhead hydrangeas, and it blooms continuously for me. For our annual, we'll go with zinnia, the lowly zinnia. Easy to grow and common, but it's common for a reason. It's easy to grow. And honestly, because of breeding work of people like Erin at Floret, the lowly zinnia has come a long way in looks. There are some absolutely lovely and very uncommon looking zinnias out there that are well worth growing. One note about zinnias in my area, which is humid, they tend to get powdery mildew badly. And so the way you might fight this is to just replant throughout the growing season. For our shrub, this was so hard to narrow down, we'll go down with hydrangea paniculata. Hydrangeas are a very misunderstood group of plants. There are so many. Some like sun, some like shade, some bloom blue, some bloom white. And so people get really confused about this. But for our purposes, we are focusing on hydrangea paniculata. Those love the sun. Not all hydrangeas love the sun. The more sun for these, the better. They tend to start blooming midsummer and hold on to their blooms for the rest of the season. The blooms start out white, but tend to slowly fade to a pinkish color by autumn. A variety like limelight is a great one and it gets tall, but if you want something smaller, you might go with something like little lime, but there are a ton of them. Autumn is probably when it becomes most obvious that our gardens peaked sometime in July. By fall, the flower power is normally very low. Let's start with perennial chrysanthemums. In my part of the country, autumn decorations are often marked by 2 things: large Cinderella pumpkins and mums in front of front porches. These are often treated as decorations only to be thrown away by the time Thanksgiving rolls around. But did you know that those very plants are perennials? If you simply plant them in the ground, they will return happily every year and bloom right around fall, especially if you cut them back no later than the 4th of July. Next, we have a shrub. Caryopteris or bluebeard is a common name. It might be unfamiliar to you, but it has lovely little flowers that start in summer and blooms all the way through the fall, or in the fall it has berries. The butterflies and moths absolutely love it. And in the end of summer, early fall, it's a great source of food for the pollinators. Next, I'm throwing in a whole category of plants as opposed to just one specific one. And that is grasses. Grasses could have gone in under any of these seasons. They're lovely. In spring, they are fresh and short, adding a great bit of texture. And in summer, they provide a lot of bulk, but yet romance, because they sway in the wind so beautifully. In the fall, they have showy tassels that are standouts in the garden. Wait until spring to cut them back because they will reward you with texture and structure in the winter garden. And for our annual, we have dahlias. Have you ever seen a dahlia? Have you grown them? You have to do it if you haven't. Dahlias range from small flowers the diameter of a lemon to flower heads as large as dinner plates. They're complete standouts. Grow dahlias from seed or tubers. Tubers are essentially the roots of the dahlia. They're just referred to as tubers, kind of like a potato. Dahlias can start blooming as early as June in my garden, especially if I overwintered them in the ground. They often have a little bit of a lull at the height of summer, but return to flower power by the start of autumn. Now we've entered winter, perhaps the most neglected season of the cottage garden. We're not going to make that mistake. We will plan for winter on our list. First, you have to get some camellias. Camellias may have been the very first flower that caught my attention in winter. I remembered my friend dropping off a flower for me in the middle of winter that looked like a rose to my eye at the time. Couldn't believe it. Flowers can grow in winter? What? I went searching and learned that it was called a camellia, and I was hooked. Camellias come in two varieties, Camellias japonica, which bloom in late fall, and Camellias sasanqua, which bloom in winter to early spring. Be strategic enough to plant both, and you can have blooms all winter long from camellias. Two is a bulb, and that is crocus. Crocus bulbs start the growing season for us here. As soon as we see them blooming sometime as early as February, we tend to know that spring is well on its way. I have them planted directly in my lawn because at that time the grass is not growing, and so it doesn't shade them out or anything. And because the leaves of the crocus look a lot like grass, you don't see them coming until they pop open. You see these cute little flowers in the grass, and it's a nice surprise. Three, I have Lenten roses, also known as hellebores. Hellebores were the second flower that made me question what life could be like in the garden in the winter. Flowers in the winter? I had a stint of cleaning houses after I graduated college, and I became really good friends with one of my clients who had the most lovely garden. It was she who brought my attention to the Lenten rose in the winter because she had a huge section of them on the hillside in front of her property. I remember being amazed that there could be that many flowers in bloom in the middle of winter. She did share one of her hellebores with me, and I still have it. Of course, I've grown my own collection since, but hers started it off for me for sure. Next, we have rainbow ascot euphorbia. It's a perennial. It's sort of like an evergreen perennial. I don't know if that's really the classification for the plant, but that's how it behaves in my garden. New growth comes in the spring that lasts all the way through to the next winter. In the winter, it doesn't lose its leaves or anything. At that point in the following spring, you have the option of cutting it back and it would start all over again. It has pretty variegated foliage that just sits so beautifully in the garden, providing unbelievable color all year long. One thing worth noting about this plant is that when you cut into it, there's a milky substance that comes out of the plant that can cause skin irritations. And in spring, the euphorbia has the most beautiful chartreuse colored flowers that are reminiscent of bupleurum. And with that, 16 plants later, we're back to spring interest with this wonderful plant, euphorbia. If you need help with roses, as I mentioned earlier, I do have this video where I share with you what specific thing, and there is one specific thing that I look for when searching for roses that are easy to grow in my humid area, roses that will be mostly disease resistant. I hope it helps you. See you there.